Hi, I'm Jamie Smart, and welcome to the next step in our evolution. And why watch a video about the next step in our evolution? Well, you may have noticed in the news that there's all kinds of changes taking place, the financial crisis and different things going on. There's just this sense that things are changing. And we hear all sorts of ideas about how people should be. People should have more integrity and be more honest. People should, get on better with each other. All these sort of ideas about how we'd like things to be. But it raises a question, which is, how do things change? How does that process of change happen for us as individuals and as a species? And it takes me back to in 2011, I don't know if you saw, but there were riots in London that spread throughout the UK. And in the aftermath of those riots, I saw a news headline that said, "Behind the riots, a multitude of causes." And it listed underfunded police and yob culture. It listed poor parenting and social media and instant messaging. It listed cultural issues and a cultural divide between the haves and the had-not. It had this multitude of causes that it attributed the riots to. And that put me in mind of another multitude of causes back in the 1840s. And back in that time, I don't know if you know, but they didn't understand about germs and biological stuff when it came to the spread of illnesses and disease. And there was a guy called Ignaz Semmelweis, and he worked in a maternity hospital in Vienna. And they had a big problem there, and the problem was something called puerperic fever, also known as childbed fever. And many, many women, a huge percent of the women who came into the hospital to give birth would contract childbed fever, and many of them died from it. And so this was a big problem. And so they had a multitude of causes for what they thought caused childbed fever. They thought it was down to bad air or bad smells. They thought it was down to beds being too close together or milk that had gone off. They had a multitude of causes for what caused childbed fever. But then one day, Semmelweis had an insight, a sudden glimpse that got him closer to reality. He suddenly went, oh, there's something on the hands and the instruments of the doctors. And so he got all the doctors in his hospitals to wash their hands and wash their instruments in lime soap. And all of a sudden, the rate of puerperic fever, it just plummeted. All of a sudden, it was 10% of what it had been. It was a tenfold fall. All because he had an insight and saw more closely how life really worked. Now, it was many years before the science arrived to back up what Semmelweis was saying, but his insight pointed them in that direction and started the journey to take them there. So what's that got to do with the next step in our evolution as a species? Well, if you look back through history, all the big changes come from an insight. They come from getting more connected with how things really work. Whether it's realizing that the earth goes around the sun, or realizing how gravity works, or realizing how germs work, it's always because someone has an insight and gets closer to how life really works. And that's what this website is all about. It's about helping you see through the outside-in superstition that's been keeping humanity in the dark until now, that's been keeping us struggling and in pain, keeping us fighting, because the outside-in misunderstanding, strange as it may seem, is behind the vast majority of our problems as a species and as a society and as individuals. Outside in is what's behind addiction and mental illness. It's behind stress. It's behind most violence. It's what's behind wars. It's what's behind poverty. It's what's behind the environmental problems that are caused by greed. All of that, strange as it may sound, can be boiled down to the outside-in misunderstanding. And here's the thing. That misunderstanding, which can also be summed up as the hidden hamster wheel, the idea that our happiness, our well-being, our fulfillment, our security comes in some way from outside us rather than from within, that misunderstanding is just a superstition. And we can see through that superstition for ourselves by having an insight. And that's what this whole website's about. And the funny thing is, you know, if you were to go back, 200 years and say to people living in the early 1800s, you know what? A day will come where people live well into their 60s, their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, and people survive routine operations, and people, usually survive the flu, and there's medicines for this and for that, and people would look at you like you were crazy. They'd go, no way, that's not possible. But we live in that world today. And so it may seem like overly optimistic or Pollyanna-ish to say that a time will come, and I don't know if it's going to be in 100 years or 500 years or 10 years, but a time will come when we've seen through the outside-in superstition as a species. We see through it and we understand it. And we'll be living in that world of deeper connection and more fulfillment and more joy and happiness and all the behaviors that flow from having a more connected understanding, an understanding of life that's more connected with how it really works. It may seem like a long way off, but we're going to live in that world one day. And so what I'd love you to do as you explore the materials here on this website and deepen your own understanding of the inside-out nature of life is enjoy the process. And if you've enjoyed this so far, just press like on this video. Thanks for your attention.